Recording started.
Okay, so we're going to start with the same words of warning that we always start with. And those are the kinds of questions that we want as submissions. So this is still loading on about 5 of your screens, but it should be good to go in a second. The only people who should not be seeing this yet are Priyanka and Vladimir. And I think it just showed up on your screens. Okay, so this is the same warning we've given you in the last like 7 or 8 study halls, but we like to repeat it. We have certain types of questions that we want you to see, to submit. We don't want questions that are too general. A lot of people are submitting things that are very much way too general. Like some people are asking things like, I want to know how to do math problems better. I mean, that's basically the entire quant section of the test. So that's not something that's meaningful. It is blurry. Yeah, these things are not, if it looks blurry, it's okay. This is not the kind of thing that we can do a study hall on, because this is basically all of quant, and that would be several hundred pages if we did it all. But at the same time, you don't want to be too specific either. Sometimes people submit questions like, what's the difference between choices C and D on this one problem? If your question is that specific, then that's why we have forums. And again, make sure you know that everything that you can post here, you can also post on the forums. And more to the point, anything that is a banned source on the forum is also a banned source here. So if you have problems that are this specific, then you should put them on the forum instead of here. And then finally, don't ask personal questions about study plans. This is not the place for that. If you have a question about your own study plan, you know, like here's my score, here's where I want to go to school, here's where my strengths and weaknesses are, we will answer those, but not here. We answer those in the forum again, and we have a folder called the General Questions folder. The General Questions folder is where you should go with stuff like that. If your questions are specifically about admissions, then you should post in the Ask an Admissions Counselor section. Okay, smiley face if everybody gets what we're saying here. The kinds of questions, I mean, the general questions, there's no way. Like if you're asking, how do I do math, then there's nothing we can do with that. But if you ask a question that's really specific, the way to salvage that is to attach a more general question onto it. So if you type something like, what's the difference between C and D on this problem, but then you generalize the question. Like if you say, and, you know, how do I solve this kind of construction in general, then that's a study hall topic. But if it's just one problem, then it's not really worth it. Yeah, sources, this is really, really important. When you give a question for us to put on the board, you must tell us where the question is from, because otherwise we cannot use it unless we happen to recognize it. So like, because there are banned sources, you cannot post OG questions. This is really important. If you want to know what we are allowed to use and what we're not allowed to use, the best place to look is in the forums at the top post of any one of the folders, because that post will show you forum rules where we say, you can use this, you cannot use this, here's a source, here's another source, here's what you can use. And then we'll tell you which sources are banned. Note that you cannot post OG questions. I know I'm repeating myself, but that's very important that you know that. On the other hand, if you want to post official questions, you can use GMAT prep software, and that's legitimate. Okay, but if you submit a problem and you don't tell us the source of the problem, then we will just ignore the submission because we can't put ourselves at that kind of copyright risk. So notice that this includes even problems that are our problems, that are Manhattan GMAT problems. Because remember, there are something like 4,000 questions in our pool between practice tests and books and question banks. So none of us have memorized 4,000 problems. So even if you're submitting our own problems, you still need to tell us where the problem is from, because otherwise we don't know. Finally, when you quote a source, you are not allowed to use another forum as a source, because those are not sources. I think GMAT Club has started to write some of their own problems. But apart from that, those are not okay, because those forums are just places where people post problems from other places. So again, the same copyright issues are still in play. There's a couple of other forums that kind of play it fast and loose with copyright, but we don't like to. So if you don't tell us the original source of the problem, then we can't use it. Okay, smiley faces if you understand these rules for submissions. And if you have any questions, please go ahead and type them in this text box, and then we'll get started. Okay, Emma and a couple other people, when we say smiley faces, there's an icon over there, a button that you can press. It's like a smiley face button that's over there. So yeah, that's all. When I say give me a smiley, that's what I mean. I mean press that button. Okay, so here is today's agenda, and then if there is extra time, which is again unlikely, then we'll look at some sentence correction stuff. But timing considerations in general, we're going to go ahead and bring this over from last time. This is something we didn't get to go over last time. And then this is something that a lot of you have been requesting recently. We're going to have a little unit on reading and annotating the RC passages. In particular, I do want you to know we're not going to answer the questions yet. We're not going to answer the questions yet. Just reading and taking notes right now. Because this is what a lot of people need help with, is what am I doing when I'm reading these things? One thing we found is that a lot of people sort of have the wrong priority here. So I've noticed an uptick in submissions of this lately. So we're going to break up, there's a link, Emma, I can get it for you. We're going to break up the RC treatment over a few sessions here, and we don't want to overload you by doing everything to do with RC all at once, but there's your link. All the recordings are listed on the bottom of that link. Also, I know I said this last time, but I'll go ahead and say it again. Here's the link. This is where you get previous classes recordings. The one thing about this page yet is that, yeah, it's at the bottom of the question submission screen, same screen. The topics for these classes are not listed. There's just dates. So if you want the list of topics, then send me an email. Here's the email address, and I'll send you the list of topics. The only day that I don't have the topic for is June 24th, because I didn't teach that one. We had a substitute that day, and I haven't watched that recording, so I actually have no idea what the substitute actually did. So, but if you want the list of topics of previous recordings, then it is the question submission screen. It's the same thing. The recordings are on the bottom, so if you scroll down, you're going to see it. You'll see a list of all the dates. Bottom of screen. Below the submission area. So there should be the list of archives at that link. Are you guys not seeing the archives? Oh, hey, whoa. Sorry. Okay, here's the screen you should have seen the whole time. Okay, now you can see it. If that happens, okay, yeah, that was my bad. Sorry about that. Here's what just happened. There's this function called roaming. What roaming does is that it lets us mess around with other slides that are not shown on your screen. However, the indicator for roaming is really weak. It's not very helpful. So it's very easy for us to basically forget when we are roaming. And so if that ever happens where I'm totally talking about something that is not anything like what's on the board, then I'm probably roaming and forgetting about it. So I would appreciate if you would tell me in the text box. So let me just go ahead and give you that warning. If I'm ever talking for a while about a topic that is not anywhere on the screen, especially if I'm telling you like to look at something. If I'm telling you to look at things that are not there, then tell me in the text box, please. Because what's happening there is the roaming function is still turned on. So if you do not be shy about telling me that. Because even if you are wrong and we're on the right screen, then it's not a big loss at all. So I appreciate that. Okay, so just to rehash now this is on the screen. The topics are not listed on that page. There's dates. If you scroll below the submission area, you will see the links. Then they should be underneath. So 5 of you guys who say you didn't see them, just scroll down and you should see them. The topics are not listed. I can send you a list in an email. Just give me an email at this address and I will send you the list. Okay, any questions? These are our 2 items on the agenda for today. Timing considerations and then reading and annotating RC passages. We are not going to answer any actual RC questions today. We're just going to talk about how to read and how to take notes because the focus is different from what a lot of people would think. All right. I mean, actually send me an email. Don't just give me your email address because I'm not going to keep this chat transcript. So actually send me an email at this address that says I want the topic list. So Raj giving me your email address, just send me an email. Okay. Here is some timing stuff. Let's talk about. Okay. So here are some questions that a lot of people don't so much talk about as much as they should. And that is the following. How much time should I spend on the problems? What should I do with the timer? How should I keep track of time overall? And what should I do if I fall behind? So how much time should I spend on the problems? We're going to do a separate slide for each one of these questions. So let's talk about this one. First, let's talk about averages, and then let's talk about limits. Okay, what's the average time that you want to spend on a quant problem? Go ahead and tell me in the text box. Yeah, it's 2 minutes because that is 75 divided by 37. It's 75 minutes divided by 37. If anybody doesn't know, there are 37 problems in the quant section, so 75 divided by that. Now, verbal is a little bit different because verbal is going to vary by problem type. Sentence correction tends to be the shortest. What do you guys think should be the average time? If you want to give me a range of times, you can. But how long do you think we're talking for sentence correction? Yeah, the numbers you're giving me are pretty good. What we're looking at is something like 45 seconds all the way up to about, say, 145. That's a very big range. But the 45 seconds is for like really ridiculously short problems. Like the 0:45 is for problems on which the whole sentence is like 1 to 2 lines and only 1 to 3 words are underlined. I mean, there are such problems. The OG has problems where the underline literally only is something like and but, and with, but with. You know, those kinds of problems you can solve in 45 seconds because there's literally 2 words in the underline. So there's not a whole lot going on. 1:45 is for paragraph length sentences with paragraph length answer choices. For instance, if you guys have the OG, see OG diagnostic section, sentence correction problem 46. That one's a pretty good example of what we're talking about here. The sentence is like a giant paragraph and almost the whole thing is underlined. So minute 45 is realistic for that one. Okay, now what about critical reasoning? What do you guys think critical reasoning? Yeah, again, you guys, the collective wisdom here is pretty good. We're looking at something like maybe a minute and a half to 2 minutes and a half. Again, this is not, I mean, by the way, some people think that they should do different lengths of time according to the difficulty of the problem. That's not realistic because you will not know the difficulty of the problem. That's the issue there. Like, you won't know what is like a 700 problem and what is a 500 problem. So it's just based on the length of the problem. So if you get like really long problems with bold-faced statements, you can use your 2.5 for that. If you get short problems with shorter answer choices, that's more like 1.5. And really, again, it's not a function of difficulty level. It's just a function of how much reading you have to do. And, you know, if you're going around in circles, you're going around in circles, regardless of difficulty level. But there's more words, because again, the main problem here with critical reasoning is that there's just some of the problems are so different in length from some of the other ones. Finally, let's talk about RC. RC, we got to talk about a couple of different things, okay? We have to talk about, well, let me open the floor here. What do you think might make an RC problem take more or less time? Does anybody know? We got the sound back. What about RC? The question is, what do you think is going to determine which questions are going to take longer on RC, or which questions? Some of you are saying the length of the passage is what determines this, how long it should take to read it. Let's see if you guys can figure out what the main factor is that's going to make RC problems take more or less time. That's not the length of the passage, because then the length of the passage will make you take longer to read it. But yeah, okay, I think you guys are getting at it. Yeah, reading and reading MSS, and then a couple of you are saying specific. Yeah, here's what it is. If you have to search, if you have to find things, then you can take 1 minute to 2 minutes. Now that's a very big range, but the deal here is this. If you only have to find one thing, you should try to be closer to 1 minute. But if you're trying to do multiple searches, then you can take closer to 2 minutes. Now notice that also has nothing to do with the difficulty of the problem. Because like some problems are not that hard, but still require you to conduct multiple searches. For instance, if a problem says, which of the following topics is not mentioned in the passage, then that means you got to go find 4 of them that are, and then 1 of them won't be. So you have to go find 4 things. So that's going to be more like 2 minutes. But the other type of problem is the problem where you don't have to find things. There's 2 main types of those. One of them is where they give you the line number, or where it's a main idea question. And those you should be able to do very quickly, more like 30 to 45 seconds. Because if you don't have to find anything in the passage, then these questions are not supposed to be that bad. The main idea especially, you should be able to do those questions quickly, because as we're going to talk about later in the RC part of this study hall, the whole point of reading the passage in the first place is basically to locate the main idea. Okay. Smiley face if you guys are okay with these time averages that we've listed here. All right. Now, let's talk about limits. As far as verbal goes, the limits are pretty much what's there. We've given ranges of times for these. So the limits are basically the upper end of each of these ranges. So meaning you should pretty much cut the rope on a critical reasoning question after 2.5 minutes no matter what, no matter how long it is. You should try to quit after this much time. Sentence correction, you shouldn't really let yourself take any longer than this. Same sort of deal with these. You might go up to a minute on these not finding things type questions. So let's say maybe let's put that as 1 minute instead of 45 seconds. So now we've got an upper limit. Let's talk about quant. What's a good upper limit for a quant question as far as how much time you want to spend on that quant question? So what do you think here? Yeah, I like what you guys are typing. Maybe you guys have been reading the forums, maybe, because most classes will get somebody who says that you should use 2 minutes as a limit, which is a very bad idea, because 2 minutes is the average, so you wouldn't want to be using that as a limit. So you've got, you should quit the quant problems once you have reached about 2:45 or 3 minutes. One poster wrote 700 plus questions cannot be finished under 3 minutes. That is actually absolutely not true. In general, the difficulty of a question has very little to do with the time that it takes to solve it. This is a test that's very insight-based, and really a lot of the really high-level problems are actually shorter because they depend on insight that you kind of either get or you don't. So a lot of the time, sometimes at the super upper end, you might even wind up with problems that take less time. So that's not really true. In fact, one characteristic of this test is that it does not give busy work. And in fact, most of the questions I've seen that take the longest amount of time are not super hard questions. They're actually questions that are at lower levels of difficulty, but are just obnoxious amounts of arithmetic. Like I've seen a couple of problems where you had to, distribute library books among students. Like these students get 2 library books each, and these students get 1 library book, and what's the max and what's the min? So yeah, Chandra says inequalities problems. That might be what you're talking about. Those can take forever, but they're nothing but like adding and subtracting numbers. So no, actually in quant, there's very little correlation between how long it should take to do a problem and how hard the problem is. Okay. So like the deal is though that you'll find out if you really don't solve a problem in 3 minutes, then you're probably not going to solve it, which is unfortunate. But if you're going to have to guess, you're going to have to guess. That tends to be the way this test operates. Okay, questions about these limits? Any questions about these? While you guys are typing questions, I think I see a couple of you typing. While you're typing, let me make the comment that if your score was 650 plus when you started studying, or if your quant score was like 47 plus, this is going to be the hardest part of the test for you. Quitting. Like, this is really important to realize this. Like, a lot of people on the forums and stuff, a lot of people on the forums are just very, very single-minded about studying material, and they don't give enough attention to the psychological aspect of the test. And one thing that is hugely important is you have to be okay with quitting. And the reason why these people in this range tend to have a harder time with that is because these people are not used to missing things. Like people who are scoring in this range, especially if they were educated in America in the last 20 years, are not used to missing things at all. And because American schools don't really challenge that much. So a lot of these people in this range have literally never taken a test where they had to guess more than twice, or maybe more than 2 or 3 times. And so a lot of the time what you're up against is a situation where you've sort of built up this perfectionistic approach, and then you're up against a test where you have to quit and quit and quit and quit and quit some more. And it's very psychologically difficult for a lot of people. And so you want to make sure that you can do this. So don't just concentrate on the material. Like when you study, you need to practice time management. And you need to train yourself to quit. You must practice time management when you study. Like when you study, if you get to 3 minutes, you have to stop. Okay, what you cannot do, which a lot of people do, is just say, oh, this is where I would stop if I were taking the test, and then keep working. That is not okay. You have to stop working on the problem. Then you can go back and review it later, but you need to train yourself to quit. If you have extra time and are ahead of schedule, then the question that's down there in the box, you probably are never going to be ahead of schedule by more than a few minutes. If you are, okay, probably 1% of our students have this issue with quitting too early. It's a very uncommon problem, but we do have a couple of students who have this problem. So if you wind up like 15, 20 minutes ahead of time at the end of the section, then yes, you should slow down. But if you are just a couple of minutes ahead of the schedule, then absolutely not, because it's very much easier to get behind. So you should just enjoy the fact that you're a little bit ahead. Um, okay. So, Thackeray, which test are you talking about? If you're talking about GMAT prep or the official test, you got to remember there's experimentals in there. Experimentals are going to be random, so that's going to, yeah, the official test, there's going to be experimental questions in there. So you will see random easy problems in the middle of your test. Someone who said, won't quitting hamper the score? Quitting will not hurt you anywhere near as much as not quitting will. Because remember, the worst thing that can happen to you on this test is not finishing. So, and I mean, if you guys see this question in the text box over here that says, won't quitting hurt me? The assumption behind that question is that you would get the problem right if you kept working on it. And that assumption, for the most part, is wrong. Okay? Like, one thing you've really got to learn, and for some people it takes many practice tests to finally become convinced of this, but one thing that you've really got to learn, and this is worth typing on the board because it's sufficiently important. This is an insight-based test. If you don't get a problem by the times shown here, you will probably not get it, even with more time. So quitting is the best option at that point. So especially if you are already behind your time schedule. I think a lot of people, and again, the reason why people assume this is the same reason that I mentioned above. For people in this 650 range having large amounts of time, because people assume that it's going to be like school, where if you just work and work and work, you're going to get the problem right. On this test, that's not how it works. Like, if you have not gotten the problem in 3 minutes, then usually even after 30 minutes, you will still not have gotten it. I mean, there are exceptions to that, but they are not very, very common exceptions. Questions down here. Zengi, I don't know quite how to say that. At what point should you switch from solving the problem to strategic guessing? That's actually a good enough question that I'm gonna put it onto the board and talk about it. So here's that question. Okay, here's a question from the text box. Okay. Basically, most people don't really like hearing this. But basically the idea is, as soon as you know that you are stuck, you should stop what you are doing and try something else. Like, literally the moment that you know that you are stuck. Okay, and this is going to require a little bit of brutal honesty, but stuck means, depending on what kind of problem. On SC, stuck means that you're looking at a split or at some grammatical construction and you just don't know what to do with it. Like, in other words, where you would just be guessing. You just don't know what to do with it. On quant, or on non-algebra quant problems, stuck means that you're just kind of staring at the problem. Okay, on algebra problems, it's not really that easy to know when you're stuck in quant, though, either, and that's what I'm going to get at now. On algebra problems, if you are just pushing variables around the page, hoping that something will happen, for more than, 10 to 20 seconds, you are stuck. This is the one that is difficult for most people to understand, because for some people it feels like they're doing something. The difference is, like in these two first examples, if you're stuck, you're literally just staring at stuff. Like you have absolutely no idea what to do, and so you're just staring. In that case, it's very easy to acknowledge that you are stuck. On the other hand, in algebra, the thing is, there's always something you can do. You can always push those variables around somewhere and try to do something with them. So algebra is kind of like driving. Okay, like when you drive, you are either lost or not lost. It's very binary. There's no such thing as being kind of lost. So when you drive, you're either lost or not lost. There's not much in between. Okay, if you're lost and you're driving the car around, then you are still lost just as much as if you were pulled over and not driving. Same thing with algebra. Like when you do algebra, okay, again, you're either lost or not lost. There's not much in between. Okay, so if you are manipulating variables for a reason, then you are not lost. That's all good. Okay, on the other hand, if you are just manipulating variables without a good reason, i.e., you're just pushing variables around the page, hoping that something will happen, then you are lost and you should quit. This is the one that's hardest for people to understand because they think, and I can kind of see why they would think this way, it's kind of like people thinking that as long as the car is moving, they're not lost. And there are a lot of people who are like that. They'll drive around in circles for an hour because that's the way they think. Like if my car is not standing still, then I'm not lost. Same kind of thing with algebra. Like people think as long as I'm pushing variables around the page, then I'm not lost. And some people will push variables around for 5 minutes thinking that. So you have to quit. And so when we say quit, we don't necessarily mean the whole problem. Quit just means stop what you're doing and try something else. So like if you have something like SC, look at something else in the sentence. If it's quant, like try a backup method, such as plug in numbers or estimation. There's a whole study hall on these backup methods. If you want to look at it, it's the February 4th recording. So if you're not sure what I'm talking about by backup methods, then February 4th, that's going to help you. The question is, how does this translate to business school? Well, right now it doesn't matter whether it translates to business school because the objective here is not business school. The objective here is the GMAT. I mean, this test is not a perfect correlation to business school, and so therefore the business school is a remote and at least for the time being, not terribly important objective. Like there's an irony there, and the other questions I'll get to here in a second. But there's definitely an irony here. The irony is that the skill set required for this test is, in a certain sense, a lot different from what is required to be successful in business. In particular, on this test, persistence is a bad, bad thing. So make sure you know that. Persistence on this test is not good. So the sort of type A personality, if you are the type who just keeps going and going and going and doesn't quit, probably good in business, horrible on this test. You have to kind of adopt the mentality of somebody who has an attention deficit issue and who just flips from one thing to another, just kind of, if it doesn't give instant results, then move on. Okay, other questions in the box. Let's see. Someone says guessing at the end is better than guessing at the beginning. Not true. The worst thing you can do to yourself is leave questions at the end of the test, because you are penalized if you don't finish the test. So the worst place where you can be stuck with guessing is at the end of the test. So whoever wrote that question in the box, that was actually more or less totally backward. And yeah, I mean, even if you're scoring over 650, you are going to miss a lot of problems. And so you still have to realize that that's going to happen. Like, for example, if you have a 47 on quant, you could still very easily be missing 11, 12 questions. And so you've got to be okay with that. Again, psychologically, it's difficult because a 47 quant score is not someone who's used to missing 11 questions on a test. But you are going to have to do that. Okay. Other things. A couple of you are looking at this. There's a recording of the study hall if you don't know what I'm talking about when I say backup methods. Minimum score for schools is not really the point of these study halls, so I don't really want to go there. If you have an admissions-related question, I'll type this in the box. If you have an admissions-related question, then you should go to the forums, and there's a folder called Ask an Admissions Consultant. And then they'll give you responses in that folder. But yeah, well, okay. Sam, we see that question a lot, but the difference is that this is, okay, like if this were a test where you were going to finish no matter what, then that would be true. But remember that you have 37 questions in 75 minutes, and you are under intense time pressure the whole time. So if you take like 4, 5, 6 minutes and you don't quit, and if you do that more than like one time, you will not finish the test. So what you have to realize is you have to realize this. You have to realize that if you're not getting the problem in the first couple of minutes, then you're basically not going to get it in all probability. And so you have to just swallow that fact and let it go. Because otherwise you just won't finish the exam, and that's a disaster. Emma, you can't worry about that. When you take this test, you have to be not multitasking. You have to be a monotasker, meaning you have to pay attention to exactly one thing at a time. And in this case, that tends to be one problem at a time. Time management. Single problem by single problem. Overall performance is not something you can think about because you will not know. That's the other thing about an adaptive test. You will not know how you are doing because you will be unable to judge. On a paper test, you kind of know about how much you're getting right. On this test, no idea, none. So unfortunately, it's not something you can worry about. Okay, now let's talk about that. Like, that's basically all this question. We basically spent all that time talking about this. So basically, the short version is see the limits on the other slides, and then quit accordingly and manage your time well. Now let's talk about the timer. So let's talk about that. Hey, I don't want that. Okay, let's try that again. Question is, what should I do with the timer? How often should I look at it, and should I generally hide it or show it? Okay, if any of you don't know, the timer is a countdown timer. It shows in the corner of the screen when you take the test, and you always have the option of either showing it or hiding it. So let's talk first about that. If you think, let's get an opinion in the text box. Do you think you should hide the timer, or do you think you should show the timer in general? What do you guys think? So, okay, a lot of people are not going to want to hear me say this, but you should try to get to a place mentally where you can hide the timer. You should not have to physically look at the timer to have good time management. A timer is a crutch, okay? A timer is like, a timer is kind of like one of those back braces that they use to teach people good posture. Like, if you have to wear one of those for a little while, if you don't know how to stand up straight, then great. But after a while, the idea is you should be able to stand up straight without the brace. Same kind of thing here. Okay, because here's the deal. If the timer is on the screen, then if the timer is actually on the screen, then one of two things will happen. Okay, the first thing that might happen is you will look at the timer at least once on every problem. That is bad. That's very, very, very bad. Because if you look, then you will not be able to stop yourself from subtracting that time from what was on there before, doing a little calculation of how much time you've got left, trying to predict how to, worrying about your timing and then stressing out. Like, this will happen. And I mean, if you do this, I mean, let's say that you take 5 to 10 seconds to do this process of subtracting, calculating, worrying, and stressing out. If this takes you 5 to 10 seconds on each problem, then that is up to you, because times 37, that's up to 6 minutes of wasted time. I mean, really, that adds up. Like, if you spend 5 seconds looking at the timer and stressing out about it per each problem, that adds up to 3 or 4 minutes over the whole task. If you spend 10 seconds doing that every problem, you're looking at like 6 minutes of completely wasted time. That's a big deal. The only other thing that can happen is if you've got the timer on the screen, if you have absolutely like Shaolin warrior levels of self-control, then you might be able to stop yourself from looking at it all the time. But then it's going to take mental effort to do that. And then that's less mental effort for you to put into the problems. You know, because if that timer is on the screen, then it's going to exert a bad influence on you no matter what. If you look at it, you're going to waste time looking at it. Because remember, you can't just look at a timer. If you look at a timer, you will subtract, and you will calculate, and you will stress out. But the only other option is if you can stop yourself from looking at it, then it'll take mental effort to stop yourself. And that effort will degrade your ability to do the problems. Because like number two is kind of like being on a diet and having your favorite food sitting there on the table. Like it's possible not to eat that food, but oh boy is it hard. And like whatever you are doing, you're going to do it a lot worse because you're like, wow, there's a plate of fish and chips on the table and I have to not eat it. It's the same kind of thing. Like if you've got a timer on that screen and you're not looking at it, it's going to be like, I have to exert so much self-control not to look at that timer. And that kind of effort really does subtract from your ability to solve the problem. So here's the deal. Here's what you should do. You should, I'm just going to spell it, the ENGI there is pretty good, pretty much where we're going to go with this. You should generally hide the timer. You should learn to measure approximate time in your head. Like, you know, in other words, what we're saying is you should know what approximately 1 minute feels like. And like 2 minutes, 3 minutes. You should be able to feel those in your head. Like if any of you have ever been competitive runners or swimmers or something like that, you know what I'm talking about. Like if you're a runner, you can tell a 75-second lap from an 80-second lap. You just can. You can feel that difference, even though it's like a 5-second difference. If you practice GMAT without looking at your timer enough, then you will get there. Okay, the way to practice this, let me tell you how you perfect this skill. Now, maybe, I'm not sure. I don't remember what the rule is for watches. You might not be able to. I know you definitely cannot wear a digital watch, but you might be able to wear a watch with hands. I'm not positive. But yeah, I'm pretty sure it's no watches whatsoever. To train this skill, you should do problems with a stopwatch that is hidden from view. Then, after each problem, guess how much time you took, and then check, and then calibrate. Because that's the only way you can get better at this, is to actually like try to predict. So cover up your timer and say, do a problem, okay, I think that was 2 minutes and small change. If it says 3 minutes, you've got problems. You got to learn to recalibrate that. But also, if you thought it was 2 minutes and it was 1 minute, you've also got problems. Problems both ways. So you need to train this skill. Once you have this is what I call, I don't think we call it this in our materials yet, but this is what I call an internal stopwatch. You should have an internal stopwatch. You should really, really work at developing this internal stopwatch. It is very important. Once you have this, then what you want to do is you want to check the time only at time checkpoints. So, timing map. Let me give you an example of a timing map. This is for quant. You can make similar ones for verbal. The way to make a timing map, and there's a lot of ways to make these. One of our labs gives you samples. But for quant, here's a sample timing map. The way that this works is you want problem number that you've just finished, and then time that you should have left. And then, so quant is really easy to make timing maps for because quant is exactly 2 minutes per problem. So at the start of the test, then like 5, then 10, then 15, then 20, then 25, then 30, then 35. So that went off the screen a little bit. Let's move these up. Okay, so if you need a quant timing map, for every 5 problems, how long in the text box, every 5 problems, that should be how many minutes? $10 minutes. So you start with 75 minutes, and then each one of these is going to be 10 minutes off of that. So 15 minutes is 45 minutes left. 20 problems is 35 minutes left. 25 problems is 25 minutes left. 30 problems is 15 minutes left, and 35 problems is 5 minutes left. And let's move these so that they're actually lined up with each other. Okay, so this is an example of a timing map. And the point of this map is that these should be absolutely the only times at which you should be checking the stopwatch. So that's basically the deal. So basically the deal is when you finish problem 5, you briefly unhide the timer. And you look and see where you're at. Then you hide it for 5 more problems. During those 5 problems, you depend on your internal stopwatch to manage time so that you don't have to check the timer every single time. Because if you do, you will waste time doing it. Then when you finish problem 10, you check again, see where you're at. When you finish problem 15, you check again. You finish problem 20, you check again. This is often enough that there should be no nasty surprises. If you're checking the timer every, 5 problems, you should not really encounter any situation in which you should suddenly be like 10 minutes behind. At most, you'll lose a couple of minutes in this sort of situation. Any questions about this sort of approach? It's similar for verbal. The verbal timing maps are going to be a little uglier because 41 into 75 is not a nice number. It's like 1 minute and 40-something number of seconds, or maybe 1 minute and 50-something. It's awful. But it's still the same kind of thing. Like the way that you do this is you just basically subtract this fraction of 75 minutes. For tallying verbal types, maybe. Let me treat this question on another screen here. If you have extreme trouble with verbal timing, you may want to tally the different problem types. Okay, meaning, here's what you do. First, make a timing map, like the quant timing map. See, I think it's lab number 5 for help, if you have our online labs. And then you may want to make a tally, which would be something like the 3 different types of problems. And like literally tally like the way you would as a kid in camp or something like that. So let's say you see something like this. Let's say you've got 7 SCs, but only like 3 CRs and 4 RCs. This kind of thing, it shouldn't be time consuming. For the person who said it was, I don't know why, because it's basically just flipping back and making one mark. So if it's because you couldn't find that page, then that's probably something you should practice at home the next time you take a practice test. Because remember, we do give you a simulated yellow pad, so you can practice all this kind of stuff on there. If you see this kind of thing, then in the text box, see if you guys can tell me what this means. You see this pattern, which is significantly more SCs than other stuff. Then what? What does that mean? Text box, see if you guys can tell me. Yeah, that's kind of what it means, but that doesn't help. I mean, what does it mean in terms of timing is the question. Yes. So this means you should be ahead of your timing map by some small amount. Like, notice you're not calculating anything. Like, it's just look at the differences and make a rough realization. You know, like, I mean, in other words, this is only significant when, like, the differences are huge. So if you've got a big number of SCs and small numbers of these, because SCs take less time than the other problems do. Like, the rationale behind this is that SCs take less time than other problems. You know, because remember, SC is 45 seconds to 145, so this should be an average of about 115. But CR average is about 2 minutes. And then remember that RC average is about 2 minutes per question, or even 2:15, because you have to include the, like, if you distribute the time taken to read the passage, which you have to do, right? Like when you talk about an average time, I mean, the questions themselves are usually faster. I mean, the main ideas are 30 to 45, and the finding stuff is usually about 1.5 minutes. But still, that doesn't matter. You have to account for the time it takes you to read the passage. So that all factors into this. So notice this is about half as long as these. Like, that's why you do this kind of thing. So basically, if you have seen way more SCs, then you should be ahead of the timing map. If you have seen way more CR, way fewer SCs, then you should be, it's okay to be a little bit behind. Okay. Usually it's a pretty exact split. I mean, you should not be counting exact numbers of problems, because that's not really worthwhile. I mean, it'll take you much longer to count that high than you would ever save in time management. But you should see the test. I mean, the test has roughly equal numbers. of the 3 question types. I think there are usually 14 RCs because there's usually 2 shorter passages with 3 questions each and 2 longer passages with 4 questions each. So that's 3 plus 3 plus 4 plus 4 is 14. But then SCs and CIs I don't think is always the same number. I think that they sometimes trade those off. But do know that some short CRs are actually shorter than some long SCs. So that doesn't necessarily mean you're better off if you get more SCs. In fact, if you're a really high-scoring student, you might find your SCs are a little bit longer than your CRs a lot of the time. Because really hard SCs tend to be longer. Really hard CRs don't tend to be any longer. They're just, more obscure. Okay, now let's talk about the next question. Here's your board. We've answered these 3 questions already, actually, because we've also answered this one. The question we need to answer now is this one. This is probably the most important question. I mean, everything here is important, but this is the key. This is the crux here. So let's talk about that. Here's the question. What do I do if I fall behind in timing? Okay, here's what I want you to do. I need to take a quick, 2 or 3 minute break. So what I'm going to do is give you like a brainstorm session. Let's say 2 or 3 minutes. Type possible answers into the text box, and then we'll have discussion of this topic in 2 to 3 minutes. So what do you think you should do if, in other words, if you find that you are significantly, more than a couple minutes, more than a couple of minutes behind your timing map, what should you do? I'm going to leave this kind of open-ended, but I'll be back in 2 or 3 minutes and I'll see what you guys have had to say. Let's talk about what you have in the box. So backup methods and estimation are things that you should basically always be doing. Some people are saying make a guess as soon as I notice that I'm behind. That's a little bit extreme. But okay, the wrong answer, which I don't think anybody put, and I'm glad that I'm not seeing people say this. The wrong answer is try to do everything faster than you were doing it. That's going to be a disaster, because time management on this test is already a huge challenge. If you try to make time management even more of a challenge, the results will not be nice. Let me tell you that. But the right answer to this is you need to guess. You need to make some guesses. Now, the question is that there's different opinions on what you should guess. Some people said you should just make guesses right away. Other people, you know, were a little bit more circumspect about this. But let's talk about it in terms of the timing map. So let me grab that timing map and then put it up here. So, okay. So here's the timing map. Let's say that you get to this point right here. Let's say you finished problem 25. And you only have 19 minutes left. What does that mean? Go ahead and put it in the text box. What does this mean? Remember, this is quant, but the same kind of reasoning applies to verbal. If you've only got 19 minutes left at the end of problem 25, according to this timing map, what does that mean? I'm looking for a more precise answer than guess tough one. Notice I didn't quite mean what do you do yet. I mean, yeah, all right, Sarathi's answer is what I'm looking for. You are behind by 3 questions. Not 2 to 3, 3. Like you are behind by 6 minutes. That's 3 questions. So you're behind. You're not calculating where you should have been. You're just calculating how much you need to guess. This means that you need to guess, like this means instant guess, not work for a while and guess. Like instant guess, like just throttle it as soon as you see it on 3 problems. That sucks, and a lot of people don't like that, but a lot of people are not thinking about it the right way. Like a lot of people are thinking about this in terms of guessing versus not guessing. That's not the right way to think about it. I mean, remember, if you get behind, the issue is not guess versus don't guess. It's not guessing versus not guessing. It's actually guessing now. I mean, guessing when you want to. Like guessing on your choice versus being forced to guess at the end. Because, I mean, if you're 3 questions behind, you are 3 questions behind. And if you get there at this point, that's 12 questions left on the test. If you're 3 questions behind out of 12, there's no way you're going to get caught back up. So you're either going to be forced to guess at the end, or you get to guess when you want to. And I'm sure you can figure out which one of those is better. You would much rather choose the ones to guess on. So yeah, that means guess within like 10 seconds. So let's talk about when. Because the big question is this. If I have to throw away questions, how do I decide which ones to throw away? See if you guys can come up with an answer to that. Because remember, if you get into this situation, you are in a situation where you have to throw away problems. You're not going to like it, but that's how it works. So let's see what you guys say. Strategic guessing, no, because strategic guessing still takes time. I mean, you can't do strategic guessing unless you look at that problem for a while. So strategic guessing is not really going to apply here, because we're talking about a situation where you literally have to guess in like 5 seconds. See what else you guys have to say. Okay, Sam, that method is going to get you a lower score. Because remember what we said earlier today? The worst thing you can do in terms of scoring on an adaptive test is leave the questions at the end. The way the test is scored is specifically so that if you leave a bunch of questions at the end, then you get a much worse score than if you guessed it in the middle. So here's the deal. I think a couple of you, one of you said you should guess questions that seem easy. I think that might be a typo. Maybe you typed easy when you meant hard. Because definitely you don't want to throw away easy questions. I mean, that would be kind of silly. I mean, you know, if a question is easy, then you do it. So I think that might have been a typing mistake. Yeah, okay, it was. Here's what you need to do. And I think you guys are starting to get at this. Is you need to have a list of throwaway categories prepared ahead of time. So what is a throwaway category? Well, a couple of you have said this, but throwaway categories are things that are on which you are weak, but also what? Not just weak areas. What else? Let's see if you guys can tell me. Like weak means you miss a lot of the problems. What's just as bad as an area where you miss lots of problems? Yeah, Thacker A has it, and then like I think a couple of others of you are typing. Just as bad as weak is slow. In fact, slow might even be a little bit worse than weak, because remember the situation that you're in. The situation that you're in is already I'm behind on time. So RC is incorporated into this. We'll talk about that too. So here's what you want to do. When you take our practice tests, these are the spreadsheets that you see when you take our practice tests. So when you take our practice tests, our MGMAT tests, you should use the spreadsheets to determine possible throwaway categories. So for instance, if you see something like this, this would be weak, this would be slow. So that's a definite throwaway category. That's weak, and that's slow. Number properties here are not particularly weak, but this is pretty slow. And then this is pretty weak. Not horrible, but and then nothing else here is really taking a ridiculous amount of time. So, but this kind of thing is what you're looking for. And then if you look at specific problems, you should also look at, you should find throwaway categories, specific throwaway categories. Actually, lots of them. You should have lots of categories. In other words, you're not just looking for the 2 or 3 things at which you are worst. You are looking for lots and lots and lots and lots of throwaway categories. Because remember the kinds of situations that you're going to be in here. I mean, the kind of situation you're going to be in. Sorry, microphone messed up. The kind of situation that you're going to be in is a situation where you are going to have to guess, like in this situation, 3 problems out of 12. So if you need that's a fourth of everything that is left. So if you know, are in that kind of situation, you're going to have lots of, we mean totally like blind guessing. So, and then things that look really hard. So if you, like, in this kind of situation, these are pretty much all throwaways. Like, almost everything on here is a throwaway. This is kind of good. It's not good as far as your performance goes. This is good as far as throwaways. Pretty much everything listed here is a throwaway category. Because everything here is either weak or slow. Like the only category here that's not weak is this one, but it's very slow. Look, this is 2 minutes and 46 seconds. So like if you're talking like the ones that are weak, this is weak, this is sort of weak, this is weak, this is weak, that's not, this is 1 and 2 is a little bit of a small sample size, but that's kind of weak, that's kind of weak. 2 and 3 is, you know, somewhat weak. But then slow is also what we're looking at. The question in the box, I mean, should you try to finish 10 minutes ahead of time? No, of course you shouldn't. That would be a waste of 10 minutes, so of course you shouldn't do that. Okay, this is slow, sorry. I mean, the only time that, if someone's saying I like to take 10 minutes ahead of time, maybe what they're telling you is that they always run behind, so they're telling themselves that they need an extra 10 minutes. Like, it's kind of like people who set their clocks, you know, 10 minutes ahead at home because they're always 10 minutes late for everything. If it's like that, then that's fine. But if they really are trying to actually finish the test with 10 minutes left, then that's stupid. They're wasting 10 minutes. So don't listen to that. So if they're just telling you then that they like to make themselves feel like they need 10 more minutes, then that's fine. But that's different. That's like setting your clock fast at home. Okay. This is slow. This is really slow. This is slow. This is slow, and this is slow. Okay. On the other hand, this right here, okay, like if you're looking at reading comp, notice this is reading comp, so we'll nail this for whichever one of you asked that question. This is a reading comp spreadsheet. When you're looking at that kind of thing, this is kind of weak. This is kind of weak. The details are not. This is a little bit slow, but this doesn't mean that, you know, you should throw these away. It just means that you should quit earlier. So like this doesn't indicate a throwaway category because the performance is 10 to 2. This is way too good for that. But it means that this person is totally not okay with quitting. The student must quit way earlier. But these can be throwaways. And these can be throwaways. So like these are, if something is just 1 and 1, I wouldn't worry about it. It's too small of a sample size. So like notice that you could use inferences as throwaways, and you could use main ideas as throwaways. You probably should not throw away an entire passage unless you are seriously behind on time and RC is all a weakness. Like if you just get destroyed on RC all the time and you're behind by like 5 or 6 questions, then you might want to do that. But otherwise, you can just throw away individual RCs the same way that you would throw away anything else. Now, the one area and same thing with critical reasoning here, possible throwaways in red. So obviously find the assumption is not a throwaway, but this could be. Like notice the differences. Each student usually has some pretty substantial differences like this. So it's really important that you go through your exams and look for this kind of stuff. Possible throwaway here because it's slow. This is a little bit on the slow side. This looks slow, but this is only for one question. So this is where you've got to be careful. Like if you see a 3 minutes here, but it's only one question, that doesn't really tell you anything. On the other hand, if you had these 6 questions for 3 minutes, that would be bad. So there you go. Now, when you go over this, the only area in which you cannot have specific throwaways is SC. Does anybody know why not? Okay, a couple of you are saying a number of rules are tested at once. That is a part of it. That is important. But that is, yeah, Joe is nailing it here. The problem is, because remember, here's how throwaways work. Okay, the way a throwaway problem works literally means, like, the minute you see that category, you quit and you guess. Like, you just totally do not even bother to solve the problem. So like, let's say that you have, like this student, this is an actual student's data. So this student really is not good at word translation, at least not right now. That means that if this student were behind on timing and he saw a word problem, he would instantly quit and guess. Like as soon as you see words in a math problem, done, guess. Not so hot here at FDPs either. So like as soon as I see a problem with percents and fractions, forget it, guess. On a critical reasoning problem, as soon as you see draw the conclusion, forget about it. Don't even read the question. Don't even read the passage. Just guess. As soon as you see analyze argument structure, like the bold faces, forget it. Guess. As soon as you see inference on a reading comp, guess, as long as you're behind until you get back caught up. But the way you got to use these is you have to be able to instantly recognize that you are looking at one of these, and you have to throw it away. The problem with sentence correction, a minor problem is that there are multiple topics tested. But a major problem is that you do not have any idea what is being tested until you examine the problem. So that's why sentence correction doesn't work as a throwaway. Because like if you decide you're going to throw away modifiers, then that's great, but you can't do that. So like if you say modifiers, this won't work, since you'll need a while. You'll have to actually scan the whole problem before you realize that modifiers are being tested. Like in other words, you need instant recognition. You know, on the other hand, I mean, if the only thing you might want to do is, like Priyanka is saying, like really long problems you might want to throw away. Although actually problems where the whole sentence is underlined are usually a little bit easier than problems where half the sentence is underlined. Because if the whole sentence is underlined, then you don't have to look back and forth between the prompt and the choices. Like you can literally just look at each choice. Whereas if half the sentence being underlined is the worst case, because then you have to constantly be looking back and forth between the non-underlined part and the choices, and the choices are long enough that it's horrible to do that. But when the whole sentence is underlined, it's actually a little bit easier. Emma, if you don't do well on RC, then that just means RC is a throwaway. If you have invested time, still you got to throw stuff away. So even if you have read the passage, if you have if you're just not good at inference like this and it takes you 2 minutes to do it, then you should throw them away. Remember that you do not have choices here. You have to throw something away. So it's not like you're just magically throwing stuff away. If you don't throw things away, then the last 3 or 4 problems you will have to throw away, and that's not what you want. So it's not like throw away versus don't throw away. Really important. It's throw away now versus sacrifice the questions at the end. And you really don't want that, because the questions at the end are, number 1, there's a penalty for that, and also number 2, they might be something that you are very good at. The question about what I did, the answer is it doesn't matter what I did, because I've been professionally teaching standardized tests for 17 years. So it makes no difference at all what I did, because what I did requires 17 years of experience. So I don't really think that's a question worth answering. Sorry. I think you might get RC at the end. I don't see why you wouldn't. I think most people's GMAT prep tends to end with SCs or CRs, but you reasonably might. Yeah, Emma says it's happened to her, so I guess the answer is yes. Yeah, no, that's what we're talking about the whole time. The throwaways, okay, make sure you're not throwing away problems if you are on time. If you are on time, then you should do the problems. You should still be willing to quit when you reach a time limit. And also, you don't have to reach the time limit to quit. If you are really clueless on a problem, you should quit. So if you get a math problem that has words or symbols that you just do not understand at all, then you should quit, even if it's 30 seconds. If you do, another thing that people think that's incorrect is that you have to go all the way up to this limit every single time. No, you don't. If you are really clueless about something, then quit early. It'll save you time. But with throwaways, you don't want to throw stuff away unless you're behind. So if you're actually behind this map, then you start throwing stuff away. Otherwise, it's just more like guess earlier if it's a throwaway, but not chuck it unless you're behind. Okay. This is the timing portion. I'll answer a couple more questions if you have them, but I don't know where the time goes, but it's been an hour and a half. In fact, it's been an hour and about 38 minutes. So I'll take a couple more questions if you guys have them, but it looks like we're doing RC next study hall, which is in 2 weeks. But I see a couple of questions in the box. So let me go ahead and answer those as soon as those are out. And then, yeah, I don't know where the time goes, but I hope that you guys have enjoyed this study hall. A couple of you are typing questions. Are there any time-saving tips and techniques? That is a very general question. Almost anything we talk about could be somewhat of an answer to that question. But if there's one thing that I would recommend on top of everything, it would be these backup methods in Quant. The plugging in numbers and the estimation. And these kinds of things, literally, if you study these backup methods for 3 weeks, you can make as much progress as you could by doing textbook methods for 6 months. They are that powerful. So go to the recording for February 4th, and you'll get it's as good as gold. A couple other questions that are in the box. Let's see. Emma, the next study hall is in 2 weeks, and I think it is at about 4:30 Pacific, 7:30 Eastern. I'm not 100% sure of that, but it should be posted in the next couple of days on that same page with all the links and all the submission thing. Let's see. No, the throwaways you can do any time. I mean, I wouldn't be. The question is the throwaway strategies only for when you're done with the first 25? No, it's you can. If you're ever really, I wouldn't throw away problems at number 5 or anything. But if you're anywhere in the second half of the test and you are behind, then you should be throwing problems away because you. In fact, if you got to this point, 25 and 19 minutes, that probably means you are already behind at this point, because unless you just totally let yourself go between 20 and 25. So no, you should. The sooner you take corrective action, the easier it will be. Like if you're at a point where you're 2 questions behind at number 20, then that's not that bad, because then you have 17 questions and you only have to throw away 2 of them. But then if you get to the point where you're 3 questions behind at 25, that's a lot worse, because then you've got to throw away 3 questions out of 12. But if you get to the point where you're still 3 questions behind here, then you're really in a bad way, because then you got to throw away 3 out of 7. So that's the earlier you stem this stuff, the better off you're going to be. Yeah, well, you can put the question on there. I mean, if you Priyanka, whatever you want to ask, you can ask it. Let's see. Ali, the poster with the big quant score and the lower verbal score. Honestly, the super honest answer to that is that people have a much easier time increasing sentence correction than increasing CR or RC. The one thing that I've never seen is huge increases in CR and RC. Like, I've never seen anybody go from like almost all wrong to almost all right in those 2 areas. I have seen decent improvements, but not giant ones. In sentence correction, though, I've literally seen people go from almost all wrong to almost all right. I mean, it took them 6, 7, 8, 9 months to do it, but I've seen it happen. So it depends. Zengi, where do you get the idea that verbal questions count for more? That's not true. They pretty much have the same weight. What is Tom's toot? I don't know what that means. I don't know what a toot is. So, or tute, or I don't know what that says. Let's see. What did he? No, I didn't say cannot be improved on. I just said we have not seen as big of a change. I mean, yeah, we've definitely seen improvements in RC, just not as huge as we've sometimes seen in SC. The reason is because sentence correction is literally just memorizing a ton of rules. I mean, it requires an immense self-discipline to do, but you can do it. It's really just memorizing tons and tons of rules. Whereas RC and CR is more like rewiring the entire way that you think. So, I mean, it really depends on the student. Like, if somebody's main way of learning things is by memorizing them, then they're really not going to be able to get that much better at CR or RC. They're just not, because you can't memorize your way through those 2 aspects of the test. Like, you really have to, unless you are an intuitive thinker, or at least you can train yourself to be more of an intuitive thinker, then CR and RC are going to be a stumbling block. So just a warning, like if your primary way of learning is memorization, then getting better at CR and RC is going to be very close to impossible, unless you can start using your intuition a little bit more. But if you can train yourself to be a little bit more of an intuitive thinker, then things are going to be looking brighter for you. Let's see. No, Zachary, the quant and verbal are not. They do not affect each other. So even if you get a perfect quant score, your verbal is the same as it would be. I'm going to stop the recording at this point.